Yes, we've got a couple of golden nuggets, 6 of them ready for you in the goodie bag afterwards. Lucy and I are just going to have a short conversation about some of these. So the first one that we discovered through trial and error almost is that there's always a policy mood music in the communities where you want to communicate. Lucy, what do we mean with that?
Oh, sorry, I've been just joined by Ginger the dog. So Chris, I might just get you to just carry on for one more moment, if that's okay.
Okay, Ginger's making appearances everywhere where he shouldn't be. But the policy mood music is what we mean whenever you run into a sort of a set of implicit assumptions or mindsets that people that you're speaking to have about climate change or mitigation actions, energy transition, and so on and so forth. Lucy, is Ginger gone?
Ginger's gone. Ginger is gone. Yeah. So there's something really important about when you have a message for policymakers. If you don't understand what the existing policy mood music is, you can often find that it really does feel like it falls on deaf ears, no matter how relevant it is, because it just doesn't resonate with their thinking and the way that they're currently working. So we have some examples from the work that we have already done, and the first one is the fact that integrating renewables into the energy system will be difficult and expensive is the kind of common wisdom. This is the sort of stuff that you think about being the common wisdom. Now, we did some work with some researchers that were trying to think about, well, actually, is that the case? And then when it came to communicating their findings, they really struggled to get them heard because they were pushing against that wisdom. Chris, can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Yes, so the solution that they were talking about was sorting out your storage technologies that will take care of the intermittency of renewables. But no matter how many times they were explaining this in the initial sessions, there was always a response from a certain group of people within the audience that were going, but it will be very expensive to integrate these renewables into the energy system. So it really was about running into that blah, blah ginger effect that happened at that moment. And we devised a number of different ways to try and get them to articulate that message differently. And at the end, it worked. At the end of the third session, most people that were there understood what the researchers were trying to explain, but it took a bit of trial and error.
And it's useful to think that what's actually happening there is that you are not changing the policy mood music, you are just finding a way to lean on it and to shift it. And it's important, once you've understood what the policy mood music is, you can think about how you're going to try and work either alongside it or within it, or if you are going to work against it, what your pathway is going to be, because you know that if you push too hard, too quickly against that, then you're likely just to get kind of chucked out of the door. So our top tip here is think about understanding what the policy mood music is for the area that you're working in and whether your work sits within it or rubs up against it. Chris, our next golden nugget.
Yes, and that's the risk currency, the idea that every policymaker has these areas of concern, the things that sit inside their elephants. So as we were talking in the session on the risk for elephants, once a certain piece of expertise, of policy expertise or research expertise, once we become a real expert in that, it sits in our elephant and we immediately, intuitively, automatically understand that particular problem. So all of the policymakers that we meet all have their own risk currency. They have the few domains of the areas in policymaking that keep them awake at night, that they understand without a need for explanation. And just some of the bog standard ones that we come across is, of course, jobs and economic growth, but also others like migration numbers, issues of national security, or issues of international relations are others that we frequently see. And what happens, what the challenge is, if we're coming with climate risk information that is too far removed from those risk currencies, we're failing to connect. We're trying to trade in a currency that the policymaker doesn't understand. So helping figuring out what it is that those areas of concern are from the people you're speaking to is really important, to then try and link as much as possibly, not necessarily with the data, because perhaps you don't have the data, but through the storytelling, through the communication that you put around your data, that will help you to get closer to the risk currency of the person you're talking to. And then they will go like, ah, now I get it. Now I understand why this is also a problem for me, working in a treasury or a financial institution or a business. I can see why these climate risks also affect me.
And just to make an important distinction here, when we talk about risk currencies, we're not necessarily asking anyone who is delivering research or research insight to become an expert in the area that the other person is working in. So we're not saying that you need to become an expert in the challenges that somebody working in finance is facing. It's just about understanding what is important to them so that you can work together to find the point of exchange where the way that you are speaking about risk is relevant to the concerns and challenges that they're working through within their sector. So I think we've probably got time, Chris, just for, well, we should move on to the next one because we're going to run out of time.
Climate risk information rarely leads to clear ideas about policy action, Lucy. Where do we run into that problem?
Oh, we run into that problem all the time. So the thing that we find is that we know that there is an absolutely huge gap between policymakers' ability to take on risk information and then translate that into policy action. So they are always asking on the back of that risk information, the what can I do question. What can I do? What can I do? But we know that it's often the case that policy, that risk information can't or doesn't speak directly to that question. And so what we know is really important is that there is time taken in the relationship between the person providing the risk information and the person who is developing the policy to work together to understand where their policy levers are and how further risk information can be tailored to support the decision making that they need to do, as opposed to just expecting there to be able to be a leap across that gap. Chris, did you want to, have we got an example of where that's worked in from our work?
So, sorry, Lucy, I actually was trying to respond to someone in the chat while you were saying that, so I didn't really get the question.
So I was just saying some examples that we've seen of there being a gap between risk and action and how we can help people to move through it.
Yes, so in a series of workshops that we did for Chatham House, we really tried to make that connection between risk information and people's thinking about policy action. And we had one particular workshop where we had a risk expert come and talk about that particular issue of climate risk and cascading risks and all of that. And all the policymakers in the room were immediately after the presentation asking the risk expert, so what do we do with this information? How do we make this, how do we turn this into policy? And so now, based on everything that we've learned in those workshops, we're developing a sort of engagement tool or protocol to test at COP, in which we're really going to try and help people make that connection between the risk information that they're being presented and then the policy levers that they might be pulling to accelerate the transition to net zero and mitigation action.
Great stuff. Okay, so as well as these, so the three insights or three golden nuggets that we've had so far, which really guide how we think about how we engage with this topic in our work. Those are kind of quite sort of content focused, quite risk specific, but there's some practical ones as well, aren't there, Chris?
Yes, and indeed, someone asked before in the chat and said, oh, this interaction process is very time consuming for the end user, for the stakeholder. And that's absolutely true. And when we started doing this, we realized that people in a policy role work in different timescales than researchers, not just in terms of like the length of a research project, but also in their day-to-day activities. So rarely will they have a meeting that lasts more than 1 hour. 1 or 2 hours is the maximum length of their meetings. So if you try to get these policymakers to come to your events, then make sure that you adapt to those timescales. Is one particular thing to do. Second point is, for those limited amounts of time that you have, focus on that listening in that structured way that Lucy explained in the previous section. So make time for listening rather than thinking, I need to tell them everything I know at this particular moment. And the final one that we have here is that we understood that just bringing experts from different sectors together in the room and getting them to talk to each other was not enough to resolve the differences in practices that they have. Lucy, over to you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. We've understood that there's a huge difference between moderating conversation and thinking about how you develop a structure that will provide you with the answers to the questions that you have. And a big part of that is about developing a set of really clear outcomes that you're trying to achieve for any interactions that you have with end users. We also recommend that you spend a lot of time, or a decent amount of time, thinking about how you then design a process that breaks down those difficult questions you want answered into simple chunks that people can respond to. It really helps to work with professional facilitators. But when you do find someone who you are going to work with, if you are going to go down that route, look for someone who wants to engage with you on the design and who is very focused on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, as well as balancing the group dynamics, because it's important to move just that beyond that idea that you have a conversation that you need to moderate in a workshop space, and into thinking about how you develop a structure that is going to give you really great engagement. So I think that's it from us. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, and I want to pick up on one question in the chat from Yanis, like, are there publicly and social media strategies to have the experts come to us? And it's not going to be easy, but I think that you should keep on trying. And what is important is that if you do get a way into them, make it worthwhile for them, make it interesting to them, rather than seeing it as an opportunity where you have to broadcast to them, where you want to explain everything you know. There was one situation 2 years ago, another workshop that we did for Chatham House, where we had invited 15, 20 different policymakers from different government departments to come for 2 hours to a whole day meeting of scientists. So the scientists were meeting for the whole day, and we just invited the policymakers to come in for 2 hours, knowing about these time constraints. What we then did was set up such an interesting interaction for them that they all thought they had been given a networking opportunity. So at the end of the session, they were all saying, thank you for getting us to connect to people that we didn't even know existed in different government departments. So try to do that. Try to make things relevant to your end users. Try to give them a sense of connection, and they will keep on coming back to you again and again. And over time, you will build up that situation where they will come to you rather than you have to go to them. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Freya.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I mean, keep putting your questions in the chat, everyone, and we'll try and respond to a few of them and take a look during the break. But we are going to give you another break now.